Hi guys, welcome back to Nairobi Legal. This video is a continuation of our first video on money laundering in Kenya, and we are going to be talking about the liability of third parties, meaning that if someone launders money and you are their friend, what liability may attach to you by the fact that you knew what they were doing. Just to give you a brief overview of the previous video that we discussed on money laundering in Kenya, which I recommend that you should go back and watch. We say that dirty money is collected either through corruption or selling drugs, and this money is normally in cash, and the person laundering this money finds a way to put it into the financial system, meaning that the money has to be deposited in banks. And then after that, there's a next stage called layering, and the purpose of this stage is to distance money from the original person who had laundered it, meaning that you make the money seem as though it is not connected to the original person who had laundered it. So the process of layering, like we discussed in the first video, involves bank transfers, wire transfer, money being sent to offshore accounts, and this money eventually comes back to the original person who laundered it. And an example here would be that maybe a company has been incorporated and suddenly it's getting a loan from an offshore bank. When this money comes back, we call that integration into the economy, meaning that this money is going to be reintegrated into the economy as legitimate money. And you can see one of the tricks that can be used is that someone sets up a company, it is suddenly having of course a loan given to it, and so many other manipulations that occur around the process of integration, and I refer you back to the first video to understand it. And then when this money is reintegrated into the financial system, the person who laundered it will end up buying jets, expensive cars, expensive houses, building blocks of apartments, and this is very common. Not to say that we don't have people who genuinely buy the things, but in most cases for reintegration, people will buy expensive assets as a way of trying to actually make this laundered money legitimate. You have to find a way to use it so that you are the person who now owns this money legitimately. So this is the entire process, and if you want to understand it, please go back to the first video we covered on money laundering in Kenya. Now, the goal of today's video is for you to understand about the liability that may attach to your family members, to your friends, simply because they knew that you are laundering money, or because they possess the assets that you've gotten out of money laundering. The other thing we're going to talk about are the penalties for money laundering, and we are going to conclude the video by talking about how you can prove a case for money laundering within the Republic of Kenya. So remember to watch the video until the end. When it comes to third parties and money laundering, a person who knows or ought to know, meaning that by your reason you must know that the property you're dealing with forms proceeds of crime, that person will be held liable for money laundering case. An example here would be that if you live at home with your wife and you earn 200,000 per month, and then 2 months down the road you've acquired a block of apartments in Kilimani, you have 3 Range Rovers, your wife ought to know that for sure this man only earns 200,000 and suddenly we have big assets you can't even imagine. So your wife will be implicated by virtue of this section, and this is section 3 of the Proceeds of Crime and Anti-Money Laundering Act. Seriously, you must know that a person who earns 200,000 can't suddenly start buying blocks of apartments, owning 5 cars, going for expensive holidays. Even you as a wife, the law will put you in a corner because you ought to have known that there was something fishy going on. The other thing is entering into an arrangement in connection with property which forms part of proceeds of crime will also make you criminally culpable, meaning that if you are a friend to someone who is trying to launder money and you're part of that engagement, this engagement could be that let me buy an apartment under your name, let me buy a car under your name so that we are able to clean up this money. You're going to be culpable for that. Likewise, performing any act whether independently or with others in view of concealing or removing property which forms proceeds of crime. The other thing would be that someone has gotten money through corruption. Someone has 100 million and now they want to conceal this money through buying land under someone else's name, and you're taking up that land as your own. The other thing would be that someone has bought several cars out of laundered money, and now you're taking over those cars as your own. You're just simply helping them to clean up the mess so that the money that they have stolen, which is dirty money, looks legitimate in the economy. If you participate in any of these things, according to Section 3 of the Proceeds of Crime and Anti-Money Laundering Act of Kenya, you're going to be held liable as a third party in a money laundering case. When it comes to family, friends and money laundering, according to Section 4 of the Proceeds of Crime and Anti-Money Laundering Act of Kenya, a person who acquires, uses or has in possession a property that forms part of proceeds of crime will have committed an offense. Just to put this into context, if you are a friend to someone, let's say we have a girl called Jen who is a friend to a guy called Robert, and Robert is 23 years old. Robert has 16 Range Rovers, 14 apartments, a private jet, but Robert earns 15,000 per month. Now, by the fact that Jen has not used her reason to know that 15,000 can't make you have this kind of a lifestyle, that way she commits an offense of money laundering, because she's part of Robert's life, in the sense that she's either having in her possession the cars that belong to Robert, or she's using this same car that is as a result of proceeds of crime. So the overall essence of this section is that you must know or use your reason to tell that indeed the lifestyle that this person is living does not match up to what they earn. And if you don't use this reason, then of course you'll be part of people who would have committed the offense of money laundering. So this is the essence of Section 4 of the Proceeds of Crime and Anti-Money Laundering Act of Kenya. If you're found in possession, using or even acquiring property that forms proceeds of crime, and proceeds of crime coming from selling drugs or corruption, then you're also going to be part of a money laundering case. Before we discuss the penalties for money laundering, I want us to have an overview of Section 7 of the Proceeds of Crime and Anti-Money Laundering Act of Kenya. And this section speaks to financial promotion of an offense. Remember here that a person who knowingly transports, transfers or receives money that has been gotten as a result of corruption or drug trafficking or any other offenses we discussed in our first video, that person commits an offense of money laundering. Just to put this into context, if minor has gotten 200 million as a result of corruption, that money is in cash, and so we shall need a driver, security and an ambulance to clear traffic as we facilitate its movement. Now, the chain of people involved in the movement of this money commit an offense, and this is what Section 7 speaks to. Now, when it comes to Section 16 of the Proceeds of Crime and Anti-Money Laundering Act, if a person has been convicted for money laundering under Section 3, which we have already discussed, Section 4 or 7, then that person is going to pay a fine of 5 million, or that person is going to be put in jail up to actually 14 years, or that person is going to pay a fine equivalent to the value of property that is involved in that particular offense. The other thing you need to understand is that also these financial institutions, remember we talked about placement, where banks come into play, or even companies, they also commit an offense of money laundering if they help or facilitate in the movement of that stolen money or money gotten out of drug trafficking. And their penalty is up to 25 million, or they will pay an amount equivalent to the value of property introduced in the offense. Now, one thing you need to note here is that, as I've already stated, you ought to use your reason, or you ought to know that either your friend or your family member is living a lifestyle that is not theirs. And so, if you're a wife and you know that your husband earns 18,000 per month. This man saves up in 4 months, and suddenly you guys have 16 Range Rovers, 2 apartments, and a private jet. So the law will implicate you because you ought to have known that my husband's 18,000 can't even afford a tire of a Range Rover. So by just not using your reason, that is how you can be implicated in a case for money laundering, because you ought to have known that this does not add up. Something fishy is going on, and this applies to friends and so many other people around those who launder money. The other thing you need to appreciate is that, again, if someone calls you and they tell you, I want to buy a car under your name, I want to buy a house under your name, and you're trying to conceal this stolen money, so that in the process it becomes legitimate money for that particular person. By simply using your name to buy that property, to just hide this money, you're going to be held liable, and you're also committing an offense because you know what you're doing. So this is the essence of section 3, 4, 7, and 16. So remember these sections, and this is the law we have currently Kenya. When it comes to how to prove a case on money laundering, you can already see that there are 4 key things you need to prove. And number 1 is that the accused person entered into an arrangement or engagement which he knew or ought to have known facilitated the acquisition, retention, use, or even control of criminal proceed, and this could be money, by on behalf of another person, and the effect was to conceal the source of these proceeds. Basically, you enter into an arrangement where you ought to know, or you knew, that whatever money you're dealing with is as a result of crime committed, and now you're helping to conceal the source of the proceeds of this crime. So once these things are proven, then you're in it, you're guilty, you're inside, you committed an offense. The other thing you need to appreciate is that the offense of money laundering is a standalone offense, meaning that no one needs to prove stealing first before holding someone liable for money laundering. In fact, the person who might have committed the original offense of money laundering, meaning that the person who's gotten, or rather the person who acquired money through corruption, might have left the country, or they might be dead. But those left behind to clean up this money will all be held liable for money laundering. Remember that if someone has assistance to leave the country and have left behind people who are cleaning this money, those people can be held each individually liable for money laundering. And the takeout point here is that no one needs to first prove the offense of stealing. Money laundering is a standalone offense. Even if the original thief ran away from the country or the original drug trafficker is dead, those left behind will suffer the consequences for their actions as far as the proceeds of crime and Anti-Money Laundering Act of Kenya is concerned. Now, thank you so much for watching. This brings us to the end of this video. If you are new here, please consider subscribing. We're going to have more content on money laundering. Thank you.